You were standing there. You remember the exact moment, even if you have never articulated it to yourself before. It was a meeting, or a kitchen, or a hallway at work, or the passenger seat of a car. Someone looked at you and said something. Maybe it was a question. Maybe it was an accusation. Maybe it was just a look, a raised eyebrow, a tone of voice that carried the invisible weight of judgment. And something inside you, something fast and desperate and older than language, decided in a fraction of a second that you needed to respond. Not just respond, explain. So you opened your mouth and the words poured out. Not the clean, sharp words of someone who is in control. The messy, overstuffed words of someone who is afraid. You offered reasons, you provided context, you traced the backstory, you cited evidence, you named the variables. You explained what you were thinking, why you were thinking it, what the circumstances were, what the alternatives were, and why the choice you made was actually, if they would just listen, if they would just understand the full picture, completely reasonable. And the more you talked, the worse it got. You could feel it, that invisible something draining out of you with every sentence. Every justification was a leap. Every reason was a crack in the foundation. By the time you finished, you had not convinced them of anything. You had convinced them of something you never intended, that you could be put on trial by their question, and that you would show up to court voluntarily every single time. That invisible something you felt draining away was not energy. It was not confidence. It was authority. And once authority drains, it does not refill on its own. It must be rebuilt from scratch. And rebuilding authority is infinitely harder than maintaining it, because maintaining authority requires only one skill: the ability to not explain. Niccolò Machiavelli understood authority the way an engineer understands load-bearing walls. He knew which structures held the building up and which were decorative. And he knew from studying every ruler, every prince, every pope, and every general of his era that the decorative structure most people mistake for a load-bearing wall is explanation. They think that explaining their decisions makes them transparent, makes them trustworthy, makes them democratic and fair and approachable. They are wrong. Explanation does not build trust, it builds doubt, because the very act of explaining implies that the decision required defense. And a decision that requires defense is a decision that is uncertain, and uncertainty is the termite that eats authority from the inside. Machiavelli watched princes who explained themselves to their courts get devoured by those courts. He watched generals who justified their strategies to their officers get undermined by those officers. He watched leaders who offered reasons get buried in counter-reasons. And he watched a very different kind of leader, the kind who gave orders without commentary, who made decisions without apology, who moved through the world as if the very idea of someone questioning them was so absurd that it did not even register as a possibility. Those leaders held power, not because they were smarter, not because they were better, because they understood something that most people never learn. Authority is not a logical argument. It is a felt experience. It is not built on reasons. It is built on the absence of reasons, on the implication that reasons exist but are not owed to you. That is what I am going to dismantle and rebuild today. I am going to show you exactly why the compulsion to explain is destroying your authority in every relationship, every negotiation, every professional interaction, and every social dynamic you enter. I am going to show you the neuroscience behind the compulsion, why it feels so irresistible, why your body treats unexplained silence like a threat, even though silence is actually your greatest weapon. You need to add some text for me to talk. And I am going to give you 7 specific Machiavellian alternatives to explaining that will allow you to hold your position, maintain your authority, and communicate from a place of power rather than a place of defense. But before we begin, I need you to confront something uncomfortable. The reason you explain is not because you value communication. It is not because you are a thoughtful person who believes in transparency. It is because you are afraid. Afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being judged, afraid of being wrong, afraid of the silence that follows a question you refuse to answer. That fear is running the show. It has been running the show since you were a child, and the only way to avoid punishment was to give a good enough reason to the authority figure standing over you. You are not that child anymore. But your nervous system does not know that. And until you override the system, you will keep handing your authority to anyone who asks you a question with the right tone of voice. Machiavelli was tortured by the Medici. They hung him by his wrists. They demanded explanations. They demanded names. They demanded confessions. He gave them nothing. Not because he was superhuman, because he understood that the moment he began explaining, he would be accepting their authority to judge him. He would be stepping into their courtroom and playing by their rules. And in their courtroom, the verdict was already written. The explanation was not a defense. It was a performance, a ritual of submission designed to make the condemned feel like they had a chance while the executioner sharpened the blade. You are performing the same ritual every day, in smaller ways, in less dramatic settings, but with the same structural consequence. Every explanation is a submission. Every justification is a confession. Every reason you offer for your behavior is a brick removed from the wall of your authority and handed to the person who questioned you. Stop building their house with your bricks. Keep your bricks. Build your own wall, and let them stand on the other side of it, wondering what you are thinking instead of knowing. The compulsion to explain yourself is not a personality trait. It is not a communication style. It is not a choice you are making consciously. It is a neurological reflex that was installed in your brain before you had the cognitive capacity to question it, and it was installed by the people who had the most power over you during the period when your brain was most malleable: your parents, your teachers, the authority figures who shaped the first decade of your life. Think about what happened when you were 5 years old and you did something wrong. You broke a glass. You hit your sibling. You drew on the wall. The authority figure appeared. They were bigger than you, louder than you. They controlled your access to food, shelter, comfort, and love. And they asked the question, why did you do that? That question was not an invitation for dialogue. It was a test. And the correct answer, the answer that reduced the probability of punishment, was an explanation. I did not mean to. It was an accident. He started it. The glass was slippery. You learned through hundreds of repetitions between the ages of 2 and 10 that explanation was your primary survival tool. When questioned by an authority figure, the person who provides a satisfactory explanation is spared. The person who does not provide one is punished. This lesson was carved into your neural circuitry through the most powerful learning mechanism in the brain: operant conditioning. The behavior of explaining was reinforced by the reward of reduced punishment, over and over and over and over until it became automatic, until it became you. The problem is that this lesson had an expiration date and nobody told you. The lesson was valid when you were a child and the person questioning you had actual authority over your survival. It is catastrophically invalid when you are an adult and the person questioning you is a coworker, a partner, a friend, a stranger on the internet, or anyone else who has zero structural power over your continued existence. But your brain does not make this distinction. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, does not evaluate the rational legitimacy of the questioner's authority. It evaluates the pattern. Someone is questioning me. I feel threatened. The last time I felt this way, explanation made the threat go away. Therefore, I must explain. The entire sequence fires in milliseconds. Before your prefrontal cortex, the rational, strategic, Machiavellian part of your brain even has time to boot up. Your mouth is already moving. Words are already pouring out. Reasons are being assembled in real time from whatever material is available. And by the time your higher brain catches up and says, wait, maybe I should not be defending myself right now, the damage is done. You have already stepped into their courtroom. You have already accepted their gavel. This is what makes the compulsion so difficult to override. You are not fighting a bad habit. You are fighting a survival reflex. Your nervous system genuinely believes that failing to explain will result in some form of social death. Rejection, exclusion, loss of status, loss of love. The primitive brain does not distinguish between these social threats and the physical threats it was designed to handle. Being judged by your boss activates the same neural alarm as being stalked by a predator. Being misunderstood by your partner triggers the same cortisol cascade as being abandoned by the tribe. Machiavelli would look at this mechanism and see it for exactly what it is: a leash. A leash installed in childhood by authority figures who needed your compliance, and maintained in adulthood by a nervous system that never received the update that you are no longer 5 years old. Every person who has ever manipulated you through guilt, through questioning, through that particular tone of voice that says, "Explain yourself," was pulling on that leash, and you responded like a trained animal, not because you are weak, because the training was thorough. The override is not intellectual. You cannot think your way out of a neurological reflex. You must train your way out, the same way you trained into it, through repetition, through exposure, through the systematic experience of being questioned, choosing not to explain, surviving the discomfort, and discovering that the social death your amygdala predicted did not occur. Each time you resist the compulsion and nothing terrible happens, the reflex weakens slightly. The neural pathway that connects being questioned to must explain loses a fraction of its strength. Over weeks and months, the compulsion fades from a scream to a whisper. It never disappears entirely, but it moves from the driver's seat to the back seat. And you, the strategic sovereign Machiavellian you, take the wheel. This is not about becoming silent. It is about becoming selective. There are times when explanation is appropriate, when a trusted mentor asks for your reasoning, when a genuine ally needs context to support you effectively, when the explanation serves your strategic interests rather than your emotional need for approval. The key is the source of the impulse. If you are explaining because it serves your position, proceed. If you're explaining because you are afraid of what happens if you do not, stop. That fear is the leash, and every time you obey it, you tighten it around your own throat. Way 1. Explaining validates the question. When someone challenges your decision and you respond with an explanation, you have communicated something before you have said a single word. You have communicated that the challenge was legitimate, that it deserved a response, that the questioner had standing, had the right, had the authority to put you on the stand and demand an account of your behavior. Consider the alternative. Someone challenges your decision. You look at them. You hold the silence. You do not explain. What has been communicated now? That you heard the challenge and deemed it unworthy of a response. That the questioner does not have standing. That the very premise of the challenge is so far beneath the threshold of what you consider worth addressing that it does not even register as a question. Machiavelli understood that the prince who answers every challenge is a prince who has accepted that every subject has the right to challenge him. This is the death of authority by 1,000 cuts. Each answer legitimizes the next question. Each explanation invites the next demand for explanation. You are training the people around you to question you more because you have demonstrated that questioning you produces results. It produces the satisfying spectacle of watching someone more powerful than them scramble to justify themselves. Why would they stop asking when the show is this entertaining? Way 2. Explaining reveals your insecurities. This is the one that most people never see coming. When you explain yourself, you do not just reveal your reasoning. You reveal your fear. The specific topics you choose to defend are the specific topics you are insecure about. If someone calls you lazy and you launch into a detailed account of how hard you work, you have just broadcast to every observer that laziness is your wound, that the accusation landed because there is a part of you that suspects it might be true. The confident person does not defend against accusations that do not land. If someone tells you that you have green hair, you do not argue. You look at them like they are insane. You might even laugh. The accusation is so detached from reality that it does not activate the defense mechanism. But if someone accuses you of something that touches a real insecurity, the defense fires instantly, and the speed and intensity of the defense is proportional to the depth of the insecurity. Machiavelli observed that the prince who protests too much reveals the very weakness he is trying to conceal. The best liars do not issue elaborate denials. They shrug. They look mildly confused. They move on. The truth of their reaction is in its brevity. The presence of extensive explanation is the absence of genuine confidence. Way 3. Explaining shifts the power dynamic. Every conversation has a hidden architecture. There is a questioner and there is an answerer, a judge and a defendant, an interrogator and a subject. The person asking the questions holds the power. The person answering the questions is subordinate. This is true in courtrooms, in job interviews, in police interrogations, and in every casual conversation you have ever had. When you explain yourself, you accept the role of defendant. You are now answering to them. You are now performing for their judgment. You are now hoping that your explanation is satisfactory enough to earn their approval. The power has shifted, and it shifted the moment you opened your mouth to justify. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the importance of maintaining the frame. The prince sets the terms of every interaction. He does not answer questions. He asks them. He does not defend decisions. He announces them. He does not seek approval. He grants it. The moment the prince begins explaining himself to the court has become the prince, and the prince has become the court jester. Way 4. Explaining gives ammunition. Every reason you offer is a new angle of attack. If you say, "I was late because of traffic," they can now argue about whether you should have left earlier. If you say, "I chose this strategy because of the market conditions," they can now debate the market conditions. If you say, "I ended the relationship because I was not happy," they can now cross-examine your definition of happiness. You have given them material. You have opened doors that were previously closed. Before your explanation, the only thing on the table was the question. After your explanation, there are 12 new topics to interrogate. Each reason is a thread they can pull. Each justification is a surface area they can attack. You have not defended your position. You have expanded the battlefield in their favor. The Machiavellian approach is to offer no surface area. A smooth wall cannot be climbed. A statement without reasons cannot be deconstructed. "I made the decision" is impenetrable. "I made the decision because of X, Y, and Z" is 3 doors, 3 windows, and a welcome mat. Way 5. Explaining signals that your authority requires external support. This is the deepest cut. True authority is self-evident. It does not need to be argued for. It does not need to be propped up with reasons. The sun does not explain why it rises. Gravity does not justify its pull. These forces simply are, and their authority comes from their existence, not from their explanation. When you explain your decision, you are implicitly communicating that the decision cannot stand on its own, that it needs the crutch of your reasoning to be valid, that without your justification, the decision might fall over. This is a devastating signal to send to anyone who's evaluating your authority, because the message they receive is not "here" is a thoughtful leader who values communication. The message they receive is "here" is a leader whose decisions need help standing up. Machiavelli would say that the prince who explains is the prince who doubts. And a prince who doubts is a prince who will be doubted. Alternative 1. The sovereign statement. The sovereign statement is a declaration dressed in calm. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It announces. When someone questions your decision, you do not defend it. You restate it. Not with raised volume, not with aggressive emphasis, with the quiet certainty of someone who has already considered every angle and arrived at a conclusion that is no longer open for discussion. Someone says, "Why did you turn down that offer?" The explanation response is, "Well, I looked at the numbers and the terms were not favorable, and I think we can do better, and also the timing was not right." That is 5 attack surfaces. The sovereign statement is, "It was not the right move." Full stop. No elaboration, no justification. Just a verdict delivered by the only judge in the room, you. The power of the sovereign statement is in what it implies without saying. It implies that you have reasons, but that those reasons are not owed to the questioner. It implies that the decision was made from a position of such thorough consideration that explaining it would be redundant. It implies that your authority does not require their understanding to be valid. Alternative 2. The redirect. Instead of answering the question, You return it. You shift the spotlight from yourself to the questioner. Someone says, "Why are you always so secretive about your plans?" The explaining response is, "I am not secretive. I just prefer to keep things private until they are ready." The redirect is what makes you feel like you need to know my plans. The conversation has pivoted. You are no longer defending your behavior. They are examining theirs. The judge has become the defendant in a single sentence. Machiavelli understood that the person who controls the questions controls the conversation. When you redirect, you seize the question-asking role without ever appearing aggressive. You are simply curious, and curiosity from a position of calm authority is one of the most disarming forces in human interaction. Alternative 3. The acknowledgement without concession. This is the art of agreeing with the observation while rejecting the accusation underneath it. Someone says, "You are being really cold lately." The explaining response is, "No, I am not. I have just been busy with work and stressed, and I did not mean to seem distant." You have just handed them your schedule, your stress levels, and an apology. The acknowledgement without concession is, "I can see why it might feel that way." You have validated their perception without accepting their frame. You have acknowledged the data without agreeing with their interpretation of the data. This leaves them with nothing to push against because you did not resist. But you also did not concede. You occupy the impossible middle ground where you are neither defensive nor submissive. You are simply present, observing, unmoved. Alternative 4. The comfortable silence. This is the most powerful and the most difficult alternative. Someone asks you a question designed to put you on the defensive. Instead of answering, you hold eye contact. You let your face settle into neutral, and you say nothing. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds, the silence becomes a living thing in the room. It grows, it presses against the walls. The questioner begins to squirm. They expected words, they expected the performance, they expected you to dance. Instead, you are still. And your stillness is communicating something far more devastating than any explanation could. It is communicating that you do not owe them a response, that the question itself was so unworthy of your energy that you chose to spend that energy on breathing instead. The comfortable silence requires genuine internal stillness. If your eyes are darting, if your jaw is tight, if your breathing is shallow, the silence reads as suppression, not sovereignty. You must actually be comfortable. You must have arrived at a place internally where the question does not bother you because you have already answered it for yourself. And your answer to yourself is the only one that matters. Alternative 5. The dismissive agreement. When someone accuses you of something and you defend against it, you validate the seriousness of the accusation. When you agree with it casually, you demolish its weight. Someone says you only care about yourself. The explaining response is, "That is not true. I did X and Y and Z for other people just last week." Defensive, detailed, weak. The dismissive agreement is, "You might be right," said with a slight shrug, maybe a half smile. No elaboration, no distress, no indication that the accusation has penetrated even the outermost layer of your psychological defenses. What happens next is psychologically devastating for the accuser. They expected resistance. Resistance is what gives their words power. When you agree without caring, you have taken their weapon and dissolved it. They cannot argue with agreement. But the agreement was so casual, so unbothered, so devoid of the shame they were trying to inflict, that it reads not as a confession, but as a dismissal. You are saying this accusation is so insignificant to me that I can agree with it and lose nothing. Alternative 6. The reframe. The reframe does not answer the question. It changes the question. It zooms out from the specific challenge and repositions the entire conversation in a context where the original challenge becomes irrelevant. Someone says you made the wrong decision on this project. The explaining response is, "No, here is why I made that decision." The reframe is, the question is not whether any single decision was right or wrong. The question is whether the overall trajectory is moving us forward, and it is. You have not defended the decision. You have made the decision irrelevant by elevating the conversation to a level where individual decisions do not matter. You have zoomed out to the strategic view, where the questioner's tactical complaint looks small and petty. Machiavelli did this constantly in his writing. When critics attacked a specific recommendation, he did not defend the recommendation. He reframed the entire discussion around the question of what produces lasting power. In that frame, the critic's specific objection dissolved because the frame was larger than the objection. Alternative 7. The exit. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave. Not dramatically. Not with a door slam or a parting shot. With the quiet, unhurried withdrawal of someone who has decided that this conversation is no longer worth their presence. Someone is pressing you for an explanation. They are escalating. They are repeating the question with increasing intensity. The explaining person stays and fights. They match the escalation with more reasons, more evidence, more desperate attempts to be understood. The sovereign person says, "I think we are done here," and they leave, calmly, without anger, without apology. The conversation is over, not because it was resolved, but because you decided it was over. And that decision, the unilateral decision to end an interaction without the other person's permission, is the purest expression of authority available. Everything I have given you today, the neuroscience, the 5 destructions, the 7 alternatives, these are tools. They are mechanical. They work on the surface level of behavior. But beneath the behavior is a deeper question. A question that Machiavelli was really asking in everything he wrote. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when no one is asking? Who are you when there is no audience to explain yourself to? The compulsion to explain is not ultimately a communication problem. It is an identity problem. You explain because you do not trust your own authority. You explain because deep in the architecture of your self-concept there is a crack, a fault line, a whispered suspicion that maybe, just maybe, you do not deserve the position you hold, the relationship you are in, the decisions you are making, the life you are living. If you were genuinely certain about who you are, the challenge would not activate the defense. It would pass through you like wind through an open window. You would feel it, you would note it, and you would continue, not because you are suppressing, because there is genuinely nothing to defend. You know who you are. You know why you did what you did. And you know that the only judgment that has structural power over your life is your own. This is what Machiavelli discovered in exile. When the Medici tortured him, they were not just inflicting pain, they were demanding explanation. Who was involved? Why did you do it? Confess. Tell us everything. They wanted him to explain himself because his explanation would be his submission. His explanation would confirm their authority to judge him. And his silence, his refusal to explain, was not stubbornness. It was the most precise statement of identity he ever made. I do not recognize your authority over me. I do not accept your courtroom. I do not participate in your trial. My actions are my own. My reasons are my own, and they will remain my own regardless of what you do to my body. That is the template, not the silence of the coward who is too afraid to speak. The silence of the sovereign who has decided that speech is unnecessary. These are opposite states that look identical from the outside. The difference is entirely internal. One is running from the question. The other has already answered it privately, completely, and decided that the answer is not for sale. The need to be understood is the most expensive addiction in the human psychological economy. It costs you authority. It costs you power. It costs you time. It costs you energy. And it costs you the most important thing of all, the freedom to live on your own terms without needing anyone else to approve of those terms. Most people spend their entire lives trying to be understood by their parents, by their partners, by their colleagues, by the faceless audience of social media. They curate their presentation. They craft their narrative. They offer explanations preemptively before anyone has even asked, because the anticipation of being misunderstood is so painful that they would rather over-explain than risk it. And at the end of that life, what do they have? A perfectly explained existence, a fully justified biography, a well-reasoned defense of every choice they ever made, and the hollow, gnawing feeling that they lived for the jury instead of for themselves. The unexplained life is the free life. It is the life of the person who makes a decision and moves forward without looking back to see if the crowd is following. It is the life of the person who knows that some people will understand them and most will not, and both outcomes are acceptable. It is the life of the person who has replaced the question, "Do they understand me?" with the only question that matters, "Do I understand myself?" Machiavelli wrote The Prince without explaining himself. He did not append a chapter justifying why he wrote it. He did not include a preface apologizing for its contents. He did not soften the conclusions to make them palatable. He stated what he believed. He argued what he observed. And he left the book on the table like a loaded weapon, without instructions, without apology, without explanation. 500 years later, people are still arguing about what he meant. Scholars debate, philosophers disagree, politicians interpret, and Machiavelli sits in the silence of history, unexplained, undefended, and more powerful than every person who ever demanded he justify himself. That is your model. Not the person who is understood, the person who does not need to be, not the person who explains their life, the person whose life explains itself through its quality, its direction, its ruthless alignment with values that are felt rather than announced. Stop explaining, not because explanation is bad, because explanation has become your cage, because you have been performing your reasons for so long that you have forgotten you do not owe them to anyone, because the energy you spend justifying your existence could be spent building something that makes the justification unnecessary. You do not owe the world an explanation. You owe yourself an honest life. And an honest life does not need commentary. It speaks for itself, in the way you walk, in the way you hold silence, in the way you make a decision and move forward without looking over your shoulder for permission. If this resonated with the part of you that is exhausted from performing your reasons for people who are never going to accept them anyway, then something has already shifted. The courtroom is empty. The judge's chair is vacant. The gavel is on the floor. There is no trial. There never was. There was only you standing in a room explaining yourself to people who had no authority to ask. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I explained why you should, because you have decided in this moment that the old pattern ends here. No more explanations, no more justifications, no more handing your authority to anyone who raises an eyebrow. The sovereign does not explain. The sovereign decides. And you have decided.